guest and going to have a lot of discussions with him and going to challenge each other as well, like we do, and that's what I like. I like the little bit of a banter like that, So you can call us on 0116-482-2086, or you can WhatsApp us on 077-488-55055. Now, our guest is waiting for us on the Zoom, is in the room. Assalamu alaikum.
Salam, Zaid. It's a pleasure to be on your show.
Of course, you know, all the guests that come here on the program, they have to introduce themselves. So you take it away from here and introduce yourself to the people listening.
Sure. To your many listeners out there across Leicester, as well as across the UK and global, I believe, as well.
Yes.
My name is Rajan Nazar. I'm the Chief Explorer for the Global Indian Series. To give you an idea, for the last 15 years, I've traveled to over 58 countries around the globe, plunging into the human experience behind our perceptions of identity, taking a second look at the countries that we now call home and taking those big discussion pieces. My work seen me from the edges of the Amazon rainforest, dealing with Ebola in Sierra Leone, being held hostage in Europe, through to dealing with every echelon of society, from heads of states through to street children. Our platform's grown substantially. Over COVID, we went online and we do a weekly podcast. We do our documentaries with the likes of CNN and CNBC. And we do a lot of work out there. And the whole purpose of the work is to really connect communities and really look at what life means beyond the arbitrary factors of skin color. So it's that is my very short synopsis of a very long life of doing some really interesting things.
Of course, that is why you're here today, because you do interesting things. And we like to connect with people like yourselves who can educate us and take us another level up. We were talking about it just before the break, that the knowledge is your power, right? Knowledge is your power, gives you wisdom and educates you and takes you to another level.
Absolutely.
So when we meet different people with different skill sets, we share our knowledge, and sharing is caring, as they say.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's the thing. It's said with your own life. We've known each other now for quite a few years. And one thing that's really direct about you is that you are a social custodian. You've got the business side that's done incredibly well, but as a human being goes, your success has come out from the fact that you empathize with people. You understand the problems that people are going through, even with your own world of cricket. The fact that you're bringing communities together, it's a powerful thing.
Of course, it's not always as easy as you made it out to be, because often you have a lot of roadblocks and you can't deal with them. And sometimes the nearest and the closest are the ones who are the biggest challenge, in this dunya. And somebody you don't even know, and they have no connection with you, and you do something for them, and you feel that energy of happiness, and it keeps you going. You need that positive energy. So what I'm saying to everyone listening in is, what we do for others is our rent that we pay in the hereafter, in heaven. So this is what it's all about. It's not my quote. It's a quote of Muhammad Ali. And that is something that I've always remembered and always quoted. And you've been traveling to 58 countries, and you've seen the lower depths of poverty. And you've seen children, they are yearning to be educated, but their priority is to find water and to find food. And you've been to these same kind of places where I've been also, where even ants, they've created ants to be a delicacy. So they're picking ants in the ground, looking for them, and that is their protein. They collect thousands of them, and the children go out and they go look for food. Now, children cannot do hunting, so what they do is they start collecting all the ants, and they collect them and they make something out of them, they cook them. So this is a huge disparity, isn't it?
It is
where we are sitting.
No, absolutely. I think we tend to forget. We often see the world as we are, not as it is. So your listeners could be sitting in Leicester, they could be sitting all the way in Kampala. The reality is they're living their life and they're looking at life and thinking everything else will probably be quite similar to their day-to-day activities, but it's not. As you rightly said, there is severe poverty out there. And I think some of the biggest poverty that we're facing is not just malnutrition, but it's also the poverty of belief. We tend to start making these exclusive hordes across the globe. We do it on particular isms. Certain tribes could do it, or even affiliations. But by doing that, we separate each other as human beings, which is probably the most disastrous thing that we can do. And there's a lot of countries that I've been to where I've noticed that. For example, I was in Sierra Leone during that Ebola crisis. This is a very visual element: blood from the eyes, nose, ears, something that is highly contagious and can kill people within a span of weeks. And there was a whole community of kids that were called the witch kids that I found just outside of the capital. And essentially what happened, their parents died because of Ebola, but because of this belief in superstition, their villages casted these kids away, saying, well, you survived, the parents died, therefore you must be a witch. And so these kids were almost created their own orphanage on the outskirts. And you see how they were living, you see what they were doing, and you see the very little support that they were gaining. And you realize this is the world in which we all live. It doesn't matter about the arbitrary factors of skin, whether somebody's white, brown, pink, yellow, black, whatever it is. It's the fact is, if another human being or another sentient being is going through this suffering, we all owe it to each other. And as you said, the rent that we pay on being on earth is supporting one another. Then we need to be standing up for those things, those injustices. But severe poverty is a big issue across the globe because it's not just about not being able to purchase things, but it's the psychology that people go through. And that psychology can create a really disastrous place on the planet. It creates a vicious circle that unfortunately people cannot escape from.
Of course, this week our theme here at the radio is education and health, and both are very well connected with each other. And we were talking yesterday to one individual who works with us here on the radio. He's collecting for an orphanage, a small orphanage in Zanzibar. Zanzibar is off the coast of Dar es Salaam.
Yeah.
And that is a place where people go for holiday, but a lot of poverty there, small place. And they replied back to him from that proposed orphanage, which he's trying to put together, and they're saying that we don't want education. We need food. So the food comes before the education. So,
and it makes sense, though. The reality is you can't eat books, I suppose. It just shows you. I think most people haven't seen what famine does to people or what severe starvation does to people. We kind of have it as a buzzword in the UK, don't we, Zed? People do. You're like, I'm to blame. I do my intermittent fasting every single day, but you go hungry in the UK, and there's a lot of kids that go incredibly hungry in the UK, and it is horrific. But most people don't see that. They just think it's skipping a meal here and there, and therefore, how bad can it get? In some countries like Zanzibar, for example, it's even taking crops from the ground. It can be incredibly tough. So I get why there's certain people like that. It's almost like that Maslow's hierarchy of needs. First you need to make sure you got shelter, food, you just sustain yourself. And once you start going up and up and up that, then you get to this level of self-actualization. But it is a really, really tough life out there. But what you're saying in regards to the need of education, it is equally important because, like the old adage goes, don't give a man a fish, teach him how to fish.
of course,
and the same type of thing.
People are very familiar with that particular fish analogy. And when I went to a school in Uganda, I quickly realized that these kids, what they most need is good facilities in terms of food and sanitation. If you get that right, what you're doing is instilling dignity into humanity. And if these kids are 8, 9, 10-year-old, and if you give them a good start with that part of our lives, their lives, you will then, the education will come after. But you try to do it the other way around. And I personally did not feel that that was right. I could not see these kids having to eat a staple every day, 7 days a week. And I thought, this is wrong. Why can they not be eating carrots and vegetables like we do? And we went to school, they'd give us a good balanced diet at lunchtime. And it was the best part of the whole day, the lunchtime, at the school. So
Things have changed, as that it's even over that essence of food. I know we'll definitely touch on the education part, but the amount of the amount of vitamins we used to be able to get from our vegetables was unbelievable. But then we started using chemical fertilizers, and what that's done is actually degrading the level of nutrients within the vegetables that we're eating. So now we're having to consume so much more compared to before. You would remember when you're younger, you used to be able to eat a couple of carrots, and that's it. It sustains you because it was fresh, it was organic, it had all the
yeah,
nutrients that you needed. Now you haven't. It just feels like you're just eating another version of drinking tap water. And so it's full of these pesticides, and it has a huge impact because you can't expect then the human brain to be working as optimum when the fuel that you're sticking into it is already polluted. And those are the biggest issues. You got same type of issues with water here in the UK. We're only, I think there's 20 years left of our water cycle. We're in real desperate need in the UK, but most people don't realize. It's almost like the three monkeys in reverse, whereby we don't want to see the reality, we don't want to hear the reality, and we definitely don't want to speak the reality because we get preoccupied over the frivolous things of life. And so there's that type of notion as well. But coming into education, absolutely, we have to also question, what are we educating kids for? What is the future that we want to create for the planet Earth? And what are the morals that we want to put in there, and the value system that connects humanity as one, rather than dividing it as we've always done,
of course, that is where we are this week, looking at present forms of education and looking at tomorrow's education and how we can start the journey at that age, from primary school leading up to secondary school. The foundations that we set in primary will carry on to the secondary. And if we don't get that right, we are not preparing the next generation for betterment. It'll be same old, same old. And our differences will expand. So we have commonality in humanity. So here on the radio every day, I'm meeting people from different parts of the world, different diversities, different religions. And it is so important for all of us to engage across the board and bond with each other, integrate.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's also one thing that we need to recognize is that, and we spoke about this, in fact, a couple of weeks ago on our podcast, it's diversity of thought is far more important than diversity of color. It's having people that come together with a diverse thoughts process that all want to make a change. And that's what makes a difference. And coming back onto the whole education side, I know that you're a very keen educationist as well, Zed. You're saying, well, what are we educating our society to do? That's the big question.
Well,
Who have we educate our society to become?
of course, first and foremost is to start them at a very early age to engage humanity into them, to see the value of supporting humans across the globe and in your school or wherever you are, in your city, in your village, and bring people together. Because that is the foundation that will be with you forever. And if we talk about, we see these wars, we create problems with these wars. So if you look at current situation in Ukraine, how the media will talk to you about Ukraine, what's happening, whereas I'm saying, well, do something to stop it happening. Don't keep fueling it, because it's 1 + 1 is 3. One side is fighting, the other side is fighting, and third person comes, gives one person a lot of weapons, and it goes on and on, doesn't it? So
It does.
they are very sustainable in creating a war by fueling it with weapons. And everybody should understand that if we're going to stop this, we have to stop the fuel. If we stop the fuel, we'll stop the fire.
It's the truth is the biggest inconvenience to people. We say that we want to hear it. We say that we want to live it, but the reality is we do very little to attain it. And that's the unfortunate reality of it, Zed. So even now, when we have a look at the conflicts across the globe, Ukraine, Russia being one of them, you've got obviously what's happening in places like Afghanistan. You've had issues in places like Mauritania where no one's spoken about the slavery taking place there.
Even today?
Even today, there's modern day slavery. And so the reality is, are we teaching people to be a group of virtue signalers, whereby when one incident happens on the other side of the world, we almost selectively have moral outrage to say that is the only thing that matters? Or are we teaching people to say, let's look through the eyes of humanity and say, what are we doing collectively to create a better planet for all? What are we doing to actually understand what the key issues are, educating ourselves on the problems that are taking place with my neighbors, regardless of what we believe their faith is or gender or any ism. So doing it without fear or favor, but having a look and saying we're all in this planet together. Because the reality is, we're on a planet and the planet is sinking if we take a metaphor of a ship. We have huge amounts of decay going on with the very fabric of what we call as being human. We got wars that are unjustified. And I don't believe any war can be justified in all fairness, because it comes from the root cause of greed, and ego. We've got politics that have almost been disarray. It disconnects humanity from itself, because all of it is based upon, again, virtue signaling. Whoever can get the most votes based upon not educated policy decisions, but upon likability, which is a massive fallacy in itself. They're the ones that get into the roots of power. So our whole system, that in my opinion, needs to be reset. We need to rethink about the way that we're looking at each other. Guys from London looking at people in Leicester, vice versa, people in Leicester looking at people in Lilongwe or in Malawi. We're all part of the same system. It's a tapestry of humanity. But sometimes we don't look high enough to see those patterns emerging. But one issue in one side of the world should be an issue on the other side. That's how it has to be. Because all of it is depleting resources, all of it's creating this really tense atmosphere, and all of it's actually creating big problems across the globe, because then you have the likes of refugees who are seeking refuge from the crimes of the day, going to new lands, and almost not getting the empathy that they deserve from a humanistic point of view. Like, come on, what? So we're talking about education. What are we educating society for? What has been broken in our education system for so long that we haven't learned the lessons for the last 200, 300 years? Because that's the reality of life, isn't it?
Yeah, that is so true. And these are all the values that we are trying to put across to everybody listening in out there. So if any of you are listening right now to Ramadan Radio 87.7 FM, we have a very esteemed, well-traveled guest called Rajan Nazar. Now, most of you will be wondering, where is this name from? Where is the person from? So from the name, you got a clue. And then from there, you got to try to do some location work. Of course, Rajan, nobody's going to guess, but you're going to tell us now, where are you from? Of course, people often ask me that question, where are you from? I says, I'm from my mother. Where are you from?
and that's the reality of it, isn't it? It's before we get all tribalistic over it, it's I'm from the planet Earth, man. There's nowhere else to be from.
So,
I'm born in the UK. One stage in life, the UK wasn't known as the UK; it was known as something else. So everything keeps on changing. But to validate your audience's reality, so my full name is Rajan Nazar. And I have a very unusual name. Nazran is actually a city in the Caucasus region. And so how the story goes is that we must have left there many generations ago, and we're part of those people that moved up towards India, towards the northern side. Singh is Sikh as faith and is continued through the whole family. And Rajan is my mother Love the name. So my older brother is called Jagjit. My middle brother is called Harbans, and I'm called Rajan. So you can see it's I'm an anomaly in my name itself. So it allows me to travel anywhere in the world without having any issues either. So it's got I think my name gave me the international perspective even before my birth. So I was pretty lucky.
Of course, you are very lucky. And your mother and father, they before they came to England, which country were they from?
Yes, that you well remembered. So we are part of the karaoke community of the 50 Shades of Brown out there. So we're from the Philippine Islands. So my mother was born in Cagayan in Philippines, and my father was born in Punjab, India. So they both met in the wonderful romantic country called the United Kingdom. And yeah, that hence where I was born. I was born in Handsworth, Birmingham. So I'm a Brummie true and true.
Of course, yeah. Now, it's amazing all that travel you have been doing in your work life, in your journalistic career, has absolutely made you your identity. You have absorbed so many different cultures and so many different diversities, and it's that awareness that we are talking about that has made you with the views that you have today.
Absolutely, absolutely. It's I have been very fortunate. It's the fact there's a great quote, and I think it actually comes from the Quran, if I believe it or not. And he's saying, "Do not tell me how much you know. Tell me how much you traveled." And I think that there's something there that is a beauty of it because what travel ultimately does is two things. One, it creates a lot of patience because most people, when they travel on holiday, which I don't often do, mine is a very different area, but you travel to a new location just to witness what ordinary people do on an ordinary day and something that you would probably be doing back at home, but you're in amazement because this time you disassociate yourself and you're really absorbing everything around you. So it treats you patience because you really get into the now and you start to understand that. The second thing it does, it gets rid of our notions of borders because you start seeing the planet as a whole, you start understanding it all. For me, the reason why I continue to do what I do, especially put myself in some areas that are uniquely dangerous, because I remember when my daughter was born, and I turned around to her, and although she's not cognizant of that at that age, but I was saying, well, what I want to be able to do is become a beacon for my family and for my friends and everyone around my society to say, let me show you what the planet's truly about. Because then if you can be inspired by those stories of what the earth is really happening and those communities and those people and the incredibleness of what makes this planet a planet, then it's going to make you treat other people very differently. Because when you see somebody that looks different from you, when you hear a different accent, rather than having suspicion, which generally happens in places like the UK, we start having curiosity and we start igniting this thing called wanderlust that we want to go out there and actually see the world through their eyes and start understanding more about this tapestry of humanity. And so that's kind of why I do what I do. But it is that travel element that it changes you. And you know that yourself. You travel, like we only met a couple of months back in Dubai, and on the streets there, and we saw a whole plethora of different communities, the guys from Philippine Islands that were walking past. Even the food that we're eating was nothing that was Emirati whatsoever. I think it probably came from the South Asia somewhere. But it just shows you the beauty of oneness that is humanity, right?
Of course, now often I wonder how does diversity work so well in a place like the Emirates, and when you come here to our cities in England, it doesn't work as well.
I wrote an article recently for the Metro looking at this, and what I think it is in the UK we have a preoccupied thought of diversity of skin tone and not of ideas. And I'm going to break that down. What that means is, and you know what I mean, you have Apne, you have the Asian community, and a lot of people get involved in politics or they get involved in council positions, not because they want to create a difference, but unfortunately, it's self-serving their own ego. So you're not getting diversity of thought. You're not getting people coming in, having a look at society in a different way. You're getting the same ilk, the same mindset of politicians or the same mindset of those who wish to lead that don't have the integrity behind it, finding themselves in those positions. And that's why when we look at this word diversity, nothing's ever changed, because we think all you need is an Asian there, and now we've got diversity. All we need is somebody that's from the African origin, then we have diversity. That's not what creates diversity in Britain. What creates a tapestry of Britain is what happens on the streets in places like Leicester, or where I grew up in Handsworth. You know, I lived on the street, and the only street, jokingly, that you can get diabetes in the air, because you had guys cooking cassava on one side, you had the fried dumplings from the Caribbean on the other, and then you had the samosa and the pakora on the other side. You know, but you had this community that was emerging. We never needed a political leader, because we all realized the fragility of being an immigrant in a country where people were still understanding what it meant to be South Asian. And you had all the connotations of BNP and everything else around that. The reason why we're not as diverse as we should be in the UK, despite the fact that we have the 50 shades of skin colors and textures around, is that we forgot that when you came to this country, part and parcel of that rent that you spoke about before that you pay is to actually create community cohesion, not to stick to your own units of people that speak the same language or are from the same bend or village in Pakistan, Bangladesh, or India. No, it's to actually integrate and speak to people and actually enjoy the moment that you can live on a street where you have people that are so diverse from around the world and have diverse viewpoints that we can actually learn from one another. But instead, what did we do? We started building our own places. We started building things just for our communities, and we forgot that we're in one of the most multicultural hubs out there. And we did very little to actually enjoy that humanness. England is one of those very, I should say, United Kingdom is one of those very rare places that one can live, where if you walk through some of the cities, you can see nearly every nationality in front of you. All of that is wasted if you don't take the chance to talk to those people. And that's the reality of living in England. You know, we have everything at our fingertips, but unless we take that plunge, unless we start looking at each other and having those conversations, man, we've just lost the chance of living a really great existence.
Now, this is exactly the kind of a talk to deliver at an assembly in a primary school and follow it up with a secondary school, where that kind of awareness is absolutely important. With some good, hard examples to exemplify everything that you have just spoken in words. And that's what we're talking about, that in education, we have to start implementing a school of thought which is based upon the foundation of human solidarity and human unity. Because that, if we don't instill into our children at a very early age, then later on we'll have the differences expand and create a fire.
Absolutely. And that fire we've seen, you know, we've seen that fire in the rise of climate change. You know, we've seen that rise of fire into disturbances in places like Nigeria. We had the instance of Boko Haram up in the regions there. We've seen the fire rise here in the UK, where we saw huge protests. That the reality is, and I know that you've always liked my frankness and my directness, so I'm going to extend that towards the audience, is we place a great reliance on the integrity of our political leaders to do what's right. We have seen time and time again that that's not the case. Being a human being is being fallible as well. But collectively, we've also been implicit in that. As communities, we've divided ourselves. In places, for example, in Birmingham, where I grew up, I remember when I was growing up, we used to have, my neighbors were from Pakistan, us guys were from where we're from, we had the other guys from Ireland, the other guys from Bangladesh. And whenever there was things like Eid, we used to have sweets going back and forth, regardless of our faith, because we celebrate what our neighbors are celebrating, because we realize it's important for them. When we have Fasaki that us guys will celebrate, they'll come over and do exactly the same thing. They replicate. When we have things like Christmas or we have Easter, any type of celebration that we knew our neighbors were going through, collectively will come together.
So what we say here on the radio is we must celebrate our differences, right?
Yeah, and the reality is, what differences do we really have? Apart from the man-made differences that we want to think, or things that we use to self-validate ourselves, to give ourselves some form of exclusivity. What differences do we truly have, Zed?
Of course, I must remind our listeners right now that you are listening to Z on the Rise and Shine morning program on Ramadan Radio 87.7 FM. So if you want to call in and talk to our wonderful guest today, please do call and we'll have a good chat with you and share some good differences with you or even some commonalities with you on 0116 482 2086, or you can WhatsApp a message on 077 488 And as just before I spoke, a message came in there saying, "What a wonderful guest you have, Zed." So there you are. That's a first compliment there for you, Rajan.
Good job. I dyed my beard this morning, Zed. That's what it is. I'm hiding my gray hairs as we
No,
speak.
I don't think
Um,
I don't think he was talking about your grey hairs. He was talking about your wisdom, and
that too.
and
But it's coming back to that question, what differences do we really have? We like to use that word. We say we want to build bridges where there's walls. Who creates the walls? Who creates the differences? We did a podcast yesterday, in fact, and it was two guests that I had, and one was a guy who's doing a indefinite hunger strike outside of Westminster. He's been 33 days without food. And he's saying he will die for his cause. And the reason why he's doing this, he said that there's a paper that was given to government, a scientific paper about climate change, because that paper changed the way that the Prime Minister looked at climate change, and all of a sudden he became passionate about it. He's saying, well, I want to know what's in that paper, because evidently there's something there that as a British public we need to know. And what he's doing is going on the streets. He was born in South Africa, and he lives in the UK, and he's now on a hunger strike, and he's very weak at this moment in time. The second guest we had on is creating a flag for the planet Earth. And the whole idea was saying, how does a flag define our thoughts of identity? Because the reality is this is color, it's texture, it's a design. That's it. And then we have this border that's been created on us. In most cases, those borders weren't out of our own choosing. Have a look at India, Pakistan. It was a line that was put in the sands. And all of a sudden after that, you're told there's 1.2 billion people, or there's 200 million people now. There were strangers before, but now you have the same identity. It doesn't make sense, does it? But we spend all our life fighting or thinking about those flags because we take it as heart, saying this is what defines our being. When the reality can be everything but that. The reality is we're people from the same lands. We're neighbors. We're friends. Our kids go to school together. That is commonality in enough. There's no differences. We may speak different languages, but there's only so many different languages that are out there. There's commonality even in there. Our skin color, the way that we look, said I can pick you up and take you to Dominican Republic and you will blend in. People will not know any different. Likewise for me, I can go to a lot of countries and I look local. Even in Ethiopia, I got away. So it just shows that even our skin color, our visual cues of the way that our looks are, there's no differences there either. The only differences that have been created in humanity, in my opinion, are by those people who want to use other human beings in order to take positions of power and to have positions of influence.
well, we call that the POP, people of power, as you've just said, positions
Yeah.
of power, because that's what it's all about. And that is where we are saying that be the change that you want to see in this world. And if we're going to see that change, we have to start our thought patterns at primary school, right? And if some of you are lucky, you'll do that at nursery school. And that is where the story begins of our life. That long train journey of 50 stations, each station is 1 decade, right? So there's a lot of stations you're going to come across. And in each decade, our development has to be focused all on the early foundations. If the early foundations are not set, you'll have a problem.
And it's also the parents, isn't it? It's as much as we push it in the schooling system, it's the parents looking back at themselves. There's a great statement. And it goes, if my shirt is stained, I can wash it through in the river. But if my soul is staying, the only thing that can bring it back to me is understanding my own humanness. And we go through life and people will be, they'll go through the content, they'll look a certain way, they'll do things for society in a certain way, but inside they haven't changed. It's not what you get out of life that matters, it's who you become. And so the parents have to be asked themselves, who are they becoming for their kids? What steps are they leaving behind? Is it one that they haven't thought through fully? Because the kids are ultimately going to follow the good and the bad. What are we doing to educate our children to say, let's look beyond skin, let's look beyond our isms, let's actually celebrate what it means to be human? What have we done to actually enjoy our own lives as parents? Do we go out there and travel? Do we do the things that we want to do? Do we give our partners breathing space to actually enjoy life as well? Because life is fickle. It's only going to be 50, 60, 70, 80, 90 years that we have. We owe it to ourselves to live a human existence that is one of virtue, that we can actually go out there. And by the end of it, we can look back and look at the world and say, I've been to all these countries, regardless of what our belief is in the afterlife. And we can say, this is the positive impact that I've had. And when you look at your own people around you, your wife, your husband, your kids, or your nieces or nephews, you can also be proud to say, I've actually helped them become a better human being by re-channeling my thoughts of what I thought it meant to be human and rediscovering the beauty that lies within. There's even in our understandings of religion, how often do we really go through those footsteps to reincarnate our thought process? In Turkey, you got this amazing community. They're a bit like the Sufis, and their poetry is one of the most beautiful poetries that you can read out there. How often do we go out there to other tribes to get distant learnings to understand what life is like through their eyes? Or do we just constantly look at life through our own community? There's a danger doing that because it means you're not moving forward. You're becoming static in your own version. That's bad. And especially at a time now where you have your holy month, where it's about restructuring. I know that you said this, the great idea of the 3Ds, that I'm sure that you're going to discipline us all over, Zed. But it's rechanging and reformulating our ideas. As much as we're fasting, as much as people are going through that process, is also saying, what am I doing to defrag my mind? What am I doing to rechange the way that I look at life? What am I doing to actually assist myself in these months, that when the body's going through this, that my mind is now free of fear or favor, that I can look at people, I can smile with people. Those are the important things of life, you know? And even the way that we look at success as a community, Zed, you've seen it yourself. We have this preoccupation when it comes to finance in most cases. I want to have a big car here, I want to have a big house there. But life continues to tick, and it will continue to tick. And there's no end to how much that one person can want. But the true currency of life, in my opinion, is in the relationships that you form. Those are the moments that you start to discover who you're about and what your passion's about. But also, those are the moments that you really make a shift in the fundamental way that other people start viewing each other.
Of course, there is a lot of deep learning today we have been discussing, and it's I would love to have a session on each one of those points that Rajan has brought forward to all of us today, create awareness, and that's what it's all about. Now, Rajan, I want to move on to the digitization of our planet right this minute. And of course, here, distance learning is going to be key going tomorrow in our education system, distance learning. So people here will just say, well, homeschooling is distance learning, but I'm talking about a higher level of distance learning. So if you don't have capacity to pay for a tutor from India, for example, or from USA, from anywhere else in the world, then what is your second choice? Is a free course on a YouTube. You can pick up a lot of good knowledge. The kind of poetry you were talking about earlier on, there's that available for our children. And it's very important because if you do distance learning, you are across the other side of the globe talking to somebody in a different accent, different color, creed. And that is so important even for a young person.
Absolutely. It gives them that exposure, doesn't it? It allows them to know that it's not just them that think a certain way, but there's a whole collection of people that go through the similar frustrations, but also the eagerness to get ahead. With our platform, for example, we've had over 48 countries involved in there and conversations right the way across the globe. And so it's picking up content that connects you to an idea of saying, well, let me rediscover what life is about. And that is part of your distance learning. But this digital idea, digitalization of education is real, it's happening. There's fears around that because one side is saying with kids going to a classroom, you learn a lot about the social behaviors. How does one act? How does one react? And as adults, I think a lot of people noticed that through COVID because all of a sudden everything was on Zoom phone calls, which meant that even the way that our body language was, it changed fundamentally. And a lot of people, when they started coming back to the office, they struggled just to even shake hands because everything, the brain just gets used to dealing with things in a certain way.
Yeah, why we'll
But
do that now even. Like when you
yeah,
somebody puts their hand out to you, you tend to sort of put your fist out to them, right?
yeah, yeah, that's it.
Or your elbow because we were used to that.
Yeah.
And now the transition will take some time, maybe another year before we are what we call normal. But maybe if we create a new normal based around the simple humanity, solidarity, and unity, we shall all be blessed for that.
We need a new norm. That is fundamental to who we are for this idea of society. There has to be a new normal. And the new normal, well, how it pervades the past old normal, is the fact in the new normal, we are connected. And it goes beyond the arbitrary factor of skin color. My skin color is not a personal brand for other people to use. My religion is not a personal brand for other people to use or for me to find myself validation in terms of exclusivity. The whole point of it is to give you an idea of here's an idea and understanding of how to live a good, purposeful existence. It's not to push into others, but it's to feel it yourself and live through the ideals of that. Even when we look at the new normal means for kids to learn how to play, to really learn how to play. Because right now we're shifting toys in front of them. We're giving them a computer game. We're saying, there you go, enjoy yourself. There's no meaningful interactions that are happening there. There's no purposeful built relationships that are being formed. That's a very dangerous place because if everything now becomes this individual story, whereby it's a relationship between a child and a TV screen, imagine the impact that's going to have on the next 50 years or next 10 years.
Of
You're going to
course,
have
yeah.
a whole range of issues coming in
Oh, it
society.
is. It is worrying. It is worrying. All of you listening in right now, all you mothers and fathers, brothers and sisters, that the new norm, we need to create that new norm based around a lot of integration, a lot of take coexistence to another level to understand our diversities and bring on the table what we call one humanity. Otherwise, if we continue to go into 70 separate directions with our 70 diversities we have in the city, maybe London has more, but then we're not going to progress as a community fit for an example to the world.
Yeah.
That is what we need to do. We are in the first world. We have to set the best of examples to the third world so that they can overcome their tribalistic issues and what Rajan mentioned earlier on, that these tribes, they start doing witchcraft and all kinds of wrongful things that does not develop their children. So very scary. But
It is. And also that in Leicester, we may talk about diversity, but how much diversity of thought is there? That's the real diversity that matters. You may have people from Italy through to Bangladesh, Pakistan, through to Greece, through to the Gypsy community, the Romani, through to the guys from India. Yeah, they all have different skin color, textures, different languages, religions that they follow. But their mindset is not as diverse as it could be because a lot of these guys are still thinking in a certain manner where it's me, my own community. And they're all thinking that way. So you haven't got diversity there. You've got the same idea, the same mentality, just replicating different languages, different religions, different ethnicities. That's not diversity. What diversity has to be and what it needs to be is saying collectively, what is my diverse way of looking at a problem? Because if we all look at a problem in different ways to find a solution, we're going to find the solution a lot quicker. What the big existential crisis that Leicester's going through? How are we eradicating poverty? And how are we bringing communities and even re-electing our community leaders to people that truly represent the community, that represent the future where the community is heading to, and not people that are just holding onto power for the sake of it and dictating terms and saying, do what I say and not what I do. Because that's a big plague within our own communities, right? That diversity of thought is so important. It's people like yourselves, Zed. You speak to every echelon of society. You speak to every individual. I know we speaking about even the 50 years ago for Uganda. It's those ideas that regenerate our understanding of identity. That's what we need right now.
Well, of course, I'd like your input on that project called Once Upon a Time 50 Years Ago, because those are exact values what you've talked about today that we want to pass over. That we came here 50 years ago in 1972 as expelled Ugandan Asians, and 50 years later, I think we are absolutely blessed if Allah has given us that power, that strength, that financial capability to go back to Uganda and to go and make a difference across the primary schools, the water wells, the healthcare, and orphanages. Right? These are the areas that we are focused on, and your input would be greatly appreciated, because one thing I want to tell you all that are listening right now, that Ugandan Asians that came here to the city and to throughout the UK, most of us at the age of 10, we spoke 5 languages. So how's that for diversity?
Yeah, exactly.
5
And I think,
languages,
yeah.
right?
And
How many 10-year-olds do you know that could speak 5 languages at that age? Your language, speaking another language, is when you've assimilated into that community, learnt their language, eaten their food, embraced their lifestyles, and you've learned from each other. And likewise, they speak your language.
yeah, and it's a method of understanding, isn't it? It's, I think, with what's really fascinating about the Ugandan Asians that came over is that only one part of the story do we speak about, which is about the Ugandan Asians that were expelled. We don't really talk about this idea of Ugandanness to say, actually, what about those 500,000 Ugandans that were murdered in Uganda by Idi Amin? And then we don't talk about also the other aspect, which I know that you're very keen on, is saying, where do we go from here? Because there's a lot of myths that still surround countries like Uganda, that surround the Ugandan Asians, where they hold on to this feeling, but they forget that this was a country where the bottom ebb of society suffered immensely. And those were your neighbors as well, because not every Asian in Uganda was successful. So when they're left with a field of hopes and dreams. When they came to the UK, they integrated and they made a difference. But the next generation also have to continue that flag bearership and continue that integration and say, well, what are we doing next? How are we going to make things work? I think the guys that came from Africa, I think the guys also, not being biased, but the guys that came from places like Thailand, Philippines, Hong Kong, the guys that came from other parts of the world, apart from India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, because the guys that had to come from another country in had to assimilate in a very different way and very, very quickly. It was a total dislocation of everything because they had to board a ship or plane in a very quick succession to leave a country that they thought was home. Then they came to a new location and then they had to say, now I need to restart my life off. There's
So,
a very different psychology that goes in there, but there's a very different emphasis then on human behavior and the human connection. Whereas when you had a lot of the first generation that came over from respectively India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, they came from a very different circumstance. Equally, it was hard because they had a total dislocation of language, culture, cuisine, but they didn't have as much exposure as the other people because they didn't deal with many different ethnicities. So there's a very interesting part of what lessons can be learned along those journeys.
of course, and we are fortunate that we did not go through those journeys that many of the other immigrants who came to the UK had to endure. We came on a plane, we landed. Those who didn't have an address to go to, they were taken to camps across the country, and they had a 2 month stay there before they were relocated.
Absolutely.
And
England was a very different place then, though.
yeah, well, I don't know, because even at that time we were not really received in this city. We were told not to come here, for example, that the city of
Well,
Leicester
yeah.
does not need you and cannot accommodate you. And you know what we are like. You tell us not to go, we still went.
Well, Leicester put an advert out in a Ugandan paper to say, "Do not come to Leicester."
Exactly.
Uh,
That advert is currently there in the Leicester Newark Museum. So all of you listening in right now, do pop down there, have a look at that exhibition. And we had that before 40 years of Ugandan Asians in England. Now it's on again. So have a look. 50 years, not going to come again. It's the one and only time that we can embrace and enjoy. 50 years ago, once upon a time, 50 years ago is a theme that is running across the country. So do connect with it and learn from it. And maybe use that platform, and not to forget the 500,000 people that were killed, genocide, in the 72 to 82 period. In the 10 years preceding Ugandan Asians leaving, there were 500,000 people that were massacred, mainly political, in dungeons and all sorts of ways that they
Horrific
lost their lives. Yeah.
circumstances.
Nobody knows the exact figure, but they estimate it to be between about 450 to 500. And that was it. You know, it was one political ideology against another political ideology, and one came into power, started massacring the others, and the other came into power, they took their revenge. And that is the face of war that goes on across the
And this
globe.
is why we need diversity of thought, Zed, more than ever before.
Exactly. And I hope today all of our listeners have enjoyed this program, and please give it a thought. What Rajan has just said, diversity of thought, pay some attention to that. What is the meaning? What is the reason and meaning? And Rajan, I'm going to inspire you now with one of our guests who came on Saturday, called Alex Smith. And when I explained to him that the best tax from A to Z, A for alcohol and C for cigarettes, there's a tax for every letter, and the last letter is the Z. Of course, at first I thought he was talking about me. And one of the listeners sent me a message that the best of taxes is the Z tax. The Z tax is the zakat, right? And Alex, he was not of the Muslim faith, but he liked that idea very much. And he said, you know what, Zed, I'm doing a project in my business, and I'm happy to donate £2,500 of the 2.5% of the profit from that project into an organic garden at a school that you are supporting in Uganda.
I think it's fantastic.
Now,
To be fair, it's an idea that every business should be doing. What we do with the Global Indian is that we support right now over 10,000 kids in places like Nigeria through our ambassadors program. And so we say that we run a business, but we really don't. It's a movement of change. So all that we do, everything that we have coming in, it gets pushed back out towards creating small projects that make a difference to people. As long as it makes a difference to people, society, and planet, then we know that we're doing something right.
of course, and our city mayor, he's very strong on partnerships amongst organizations, the commercial sector, and then the local and the national government. So partnerships is, I like that idea. I think it's a wonderful idea that all the organizations in the community, the charities in the community, come together and let us help each other to find support from the commercial sector for each organization, so they can support them and be partners. And this is how we will develop our community. This is how we can encourage more young people to get involved with community. Let's everybody be a CDO. a community development officer, right? If all of us lend a hand, wherever you are, your opinion counts. And we can then build a better community for tomorrow. Because if we don't do it today, then tomorrow is going to be a sad place. It's our responsibility to empower the youth, the youngsters. And in Uganda, we are starting with the primary schools, because this is what we believe, that if we empower them with the correct tools, they will have a chance to get ahead in their future and bring change, much needed change in all the political spheres in the world, Rajan.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. Absolutely agree.
Great. I'm happy that you agree, because I was hoping that you would disagree and we could have a little argument and
No, no, no.
make this program more exciting, you know?
No, no.
Right?
I agree. I think it's that idea of saying that as much as we say tomorrow's going to be bad, we don't realize just how bad today is. Today is bad, Zed. It is terrible. We are facing existential crisis as a planet. We have so much suffering and so much poverty. It is unbelievable. And it's very easy for us in the UK, isn't it? Because we go to the tap, we've got fresh water, we go home, we eat, we do our things. And even when money's tight, we still get by for most people. There's some people where life is incredibly hard in the UK. We have levels of poverty that shouldn't exist here, but it does. But there's other parts of the world equally where we are our brother's keeper, where things are so horrifically terrible that we don't even know about these, that we don't even speak about these stories. And the fact that we don't even talk about them does the greatest disservice to what it is to be human. Like we're talking about political change. I want to see a media change. I want to see platforms that start to emerge where they give you the world news, not just Western news, but the world news to inform people without fear or favor. I want to see our mechanisms that in which we communicate with each other changing as well, that we're almost forcing ourselves to become anthropologists, that we're learning about human behavior. I want to see education change. We should be learning things, life lessons of how do you love? How do you show respect? How do you show that you care for somebody? Those are things that are really important for today's society. As our populations increase, learning math and English, yes, is important, but learning human behavior is more essential now than ever to ensure that we don't have big, deep misunderstandings, because that's how war starts. Is all that things that creates diversity of thought that connects people together. I want to see the way that supermarkets are running changed, because today is bad. It's not about tomorrow. Today is really, really bad, Zed. And there's big, deep fears. If you got listeners out there that are parents, they should be worried about their child's future. And the reason why I said they need to be worried is because if they're worried and they're frustrated, they're more likely to act in terms of creating a better, bigger good than just looking at pure survival for themselves. This planet, one lesson that we can learn is that we need each other. The cell on your thumb doesn't see the cell on your toe, but it's part of the same system. Same thing with humanity across the planet. Those people living in far off lands, they may be far off lands, but they're still part of you. We owe it to ourselves as a collective to come together in a powerful way, without flags, without borders, without any of these isms, to say, in the name of humanity, here's a time that we will change not just our political systems, but we'll start changing the way that we think about each other. Because the moment we do that is the moment we start creating real world peace. It's the moment we start to share our resources rather than hoard. It's a moment that the earth starts to repair itself. Otherwise, there's only going to be one outcome, and it's not going to be good.
Right. It's just an hour has gone so fast, Rajan, and we're going to leave our listeners with a very good thought for all of you, which is to say that yesterday was not so good. Today is a little bit better, but tomorrow it's within all of us to make it even better. That is what this program has been about today. And I'd like Rajan, you got 20 seconds to say your last words.
For for you, Zed, for the work that you do, I think is absolutely outstanding. And if I may do a plug, if people want to find out more about the work that we do, all you have to do is go to www.globalindianseries.com. There you can
Great.
see all our